The god's wood was quieter than snow. The hush there felt older than Winterfell's walls, older than the stones themselves, older even than the dark water sleeping beneath the heart tree's fingers. A gull from the White Knife had ridden a long wind inland and lost itself somewhere above the towers at noon. But by dusk, the only wings left were ravens, and they knew this place. They stepped on roots slick with melt, and watched the boy in the wheeled chair as if he were a thing carved from the same white wood, and could not surprise them. The boy breathed mist. He had gloves on, fur-lined and soft as foal's ear. But he did not wear them to warm his fingers. He wore them because he felt less human when he touched anything with his bare hands. There were days when even skin against skin called up too much, an echo of hoofbeats on a field that no longer existed, the scrape of bone on stone, a woman's laughter swallowed by centuries until it was only a shape, like a mouth forming a name without sound. Today the air was very clear. He let his glove lie in his lap, and he reached one hand against the bark. Bran felt the tree think. It was not thought, as men understood it. It was a long, slow turning of the cold earth under snow, the taste of iron and sap, the memory of a sky before towers and before horns, a sky where the northern lights dragged green scarves over the world and the first men stood ankle-deep in frost and promise. The bark was smooth under his palm, but in him it became rough, then young, then sapling slick. He saw a woman with hair like soot pull a thread from a net of branches and twist it into a ring. He saw a man with a hammer that was only a stone hit post, that was only the ghost of a fence. He saw wolves run through drifts so high their howls came out as white fog and were whipped to tatters by the wind. "Your Grace," said a voice behind him. "The ink wants the fire." Bran opened his eyes. The world narrowed to what was present. The heart tree's carved face, the small brazier Maester Walken had set beside it, the smell of pitch and cedar, and the way the snow, somehow, had learned a trick of vanishing the moment it touched the brazier's lip. Walken squatted, rubbing his hands, his gray hair sprung with damp. "Let it want," Bran said. His voice had changed in the last years. It came out lighter than he expected when he did not think to wait it, age and winter giving it grace he had not asked for. "Ink's patience is better than men's." A raven flapped down, black against white, then settled in the crook above them and gave a single soft croak as if to set the mark of a scribe on the evening. Maester Walken smiled at it, and then at Bran. He had snow in his beard. He looked like a man with one boot in two worlds, one in the ice and one in the workroom, with its shelves and horn cups and jars of lampblack. "Lady Sansa asked that we begin," he murmured. "The lords will want words to weigh, not only winds, and the free folk have little patience for talk that circles the meat without a knife." "They'll have a knife," Bran said, "and meat enough if they stay through tomorrow." Walken rose, careful of his knees. "To open a thing like this, Your Grace, it needs to be older than we are," Bran finished softly, "and yet new enough to wash what blood it must wash." Walken's eyes moved, the way a cautious man looks for traps in snow disguised as blankness. "You said last night you would choose a name." Bran turned his face toward the weirwood. The mouth carved into the trunk seemed thoughtful tonight rather than grieving, as if something had been said to it that it could not yet decide was wisdom or winter's cunning. "A charter can be a lie if it only gathers breath and doesn't make bones. I want bones. Bones that can be mended when they're broken, and bones that can bear weight. A thing that will live when men who sign it are gone." He paused. "The Charter of Hearth and Hill." Walken tasted the shape of the phrase as if it were soup. On a cold day. Hearth for guest right. Hill for the old ways and their stones. It will do. He glanced toward the castle. "They wait. They've always waited," Bran said. "They will again. Light the brazier. Warm the ink, bring the horn." The maester did as he was bid. The brazier's open mouth licked and hissed. The little horn filled with ink looked like a child of the tree's red leaves. Something dropped and caught. Walken leaned the quill. Bran's hands were steady. When he took the quill, it was not like a sword. And yet there was blood in it all the same. The way a winter river carries old battles far out to sea and no fish swims there without tasting steel. He began. These are words for north of the neck, for all who name the winters by their teeth, and know the sound a house makes when it holds against snow. Let all who carry a blade or a child or a burden of meat know them. Let the houses who take their names from land, and the free who take their names from themselves, hear. The hearth calls the hill, and the hill answers. Between them there is a fire, and a path up to it. The quill scratched like a small animal somewhere under wood. The letters looked like tracks left by something that had no fear of being followed. Walken watched them dry. He looked at Bran's face while he wrote, as if the face might spill what the words would not yet tell. A gust shook the leaves. They did not fall. They moved the way the throats of singers move when sound is about to be made. Bran paused for a moment, looked up through a thin net of red, and saw the sky go dark in a way that had little to do with clouds. The vision came as lightly as breath this time, not like a hand dragging him through a door. He saw a field unfenced, and men standing apart, each with a spear butt on the ground, as if seeds would make themselves of iron. He saw two boys with hair the color of cedar bark, standing shoulder to shoulder, and refusing to kneel. And in the distance, he saw a woman under a tree hold up a ball, and let snow fall in it until it was water. These glimpses were like the flight of a bird between branches, rather than a plunge. He took them and made them meet for thought. "Send to my sister," he said, his eyes on the words. "Tell Lady Sansa that the hill will not come down to the hearth. The hearth must build a path to the hill." Walken nodded with the grave confusion of a man who has learned not to confess confusion. "As you say, Your Grace. And tell her that I remember when Father sat here, and did not know he was watched." Walken hesitated. "By you?" "Yes." Bran set down the quill long enough to warm his fingers above the brazier. The heat felt like something borrowed. "And by the tree. I want her to remember that we are watched when we make vows. It makes us careful." He took up the quill again. "We will need careful." By the time the ink began to clump in the horn, and the brazier spat its last angry cinder, the first bones of the thing were on wool. Walken folded the cloth that had lain beneath the parchment, so no ember could gnaw it, and then tucked the sheet into a leather case, as if winter itself might steal it for kindling. "Shall I send this to the solar?" he asked. "Send it to the hall," Bran said. "I would have the words breathe smoke and beer, not only candle wax." He drew his glove back on, more for the maester's comfort than his own. "And tell them to set a place by the fire for Tormund Giantsbane, where he can boast loud enough that Lord Glover hears there is one man in the world besides him who knows how to split a pine." Walken laughed before he could help it. The sound leapt like a fox. Then he bowed and left, his steps deliberate on the packed path. Bran's wheels followed on slower business. He had learned to love the sound of the chair's rings turning. It made the world slope honest. The courtyard was busy with small light. Men crossed from buttery to hall, and their shadows jumped and lurched, as if drunker than their bodies. Snow had been beaten back into ragged paths, and refrozen to glass, where dozens of feet had convinced it to be a floor. The great gates were shut. Inside the loose ring of winter, Winterfell was warm enough to let a child's breath run and not die. The child in question was no child. Bran knew the slope and the wheel and the drag of furs, and what weight was, and he knew that the heat that rose from the kennels was dog and straw, and somewhere in it, a story about meat that had run too slow. Tormund came before the ale. That was an odd enough thing in itself. He pushed through on a gust smelling of snow and pine, and the kind of nights where a man only survives because he shares heat with another. He had lost weight, which on a man like him meant he had gone from mountain to hill. His beard held ice. His laugh held more. "Little Crow," he boomed, though he had not called Bran that before. He called every man little when he loved them, and men, even those who did not think themselves men anymore, were not spared. "You look like a bit of white wood someone is taught to talk. How long will you make us wait while you talk your talking tree into letting us do what we came to do?" "Long enough to cool your temper," Bran said. "Not long enough to chill your bones. That's pretty talk. I brought pretty talk too." Tormund sniffed at his hands as if to see whether they would pass for clean at a southern table. I brought Crowkiller's boy, plays the reed like river wind, and I brought the woman who breaks axes with her bare hands, and I brought a goat that pisses like a king. When the goat pisses, you'll know why I came south in snow to argue with you. Benderamen, your goat's bladder is an ambassador, said Sansa, from the high end of the hall where she had stepped to meet them. Fitting. King Robb once swore to men who hid behind a cow. Tormund turned and saw her and set his hands on his hips, like a man contemplating a storm. Ah, he said softer. Sister of snow, queen of ice and salt faces, you grew more pretty and more sharp both, and I can't say which way you plan to use either. Ace needed, Sansa said. Her hair tonight was braided like a road with many forks, and at the end of each fork, a tiny silver leaf glinted when it caught firelight. She looked at Tormund with a queen's courtesy and at Bran with a sister's concern, in the little movements that mean. Are you cold? Are you eating? Do I need to put my name on this thing you do so they will call it ours? Bran nodded, very slightly. She gave him the smallest smile in answer. He felt it like a touch on the back of his hand. They ate. They ate in the northern way, as if food were a fire, and each mouthful a log you must put on quickly lest the light go out. And yet somehow there was quiet in it. Wolves thumped their tails under tables, and pretended flat out they had not learned in all these years that bones do not belong to them until men say so. The smells were old friends. Onion and venison and beer and wet wool and wood smoke, and the tang of iron from men who had cleaned their gear without grace. Bran watched and let the hall's noise pour into him. A river washing stones smooth. The lords came wary. They had that look men wear when they are walking into a room where boys once ran with sticks, and now the sticks are swords, and the boys are dead. Lord Glover looked like a wall with a face. Aelys Karstark looked like a torch burning so hot its light was blue. Marlon Manderly had his father's hunger and his grandfather's laugh, and he bent it as politely as a man can bend a laugh. From Bear Island came a woman whose name would not keep still. Mage to some, Daisy to others, and none of them, if truth be told, but the strength of the island in her shoulders. They took places and pretended not to watch where the free folk sat. The free folk pretended not to care. Sansa did not pretend anything. She lifted a cup of beer and held it a moment until the hall's breath had settled around it. The North remembers, she said simply. It remembers hunger. It remembers summer's lies. It remembers murder and marriage and guessed right when it is kept, and guessed right when it is broken. It also remembers that there were men north of our wall before there was a wall. We lived with them, and we died with them. We fought them, and we bled with them. We forgot that easier than we should have. My brother would have us remember again. Nender. She turned her face to Bran. All the faces in the hall turned with it, like the heads of flowers moving toward a sun they did not quite trust. Bran let his hand rest on the arm of the chair, so lightly it did not seem he was touching anything at all. We set spears in the snow, and we called the space between them ours, he said. We did that so long that we forgot the snow owns us. You can hand a man a piece of the sky and say it's a field, and it will be a field while he believes, and while he holds it against others who wish to believe something else. Then come winter, and the sky takes itself back. Men kill each other when the sky proves it cannot be owned. Then no one. Tormund huffed. Say it plain, Whitewood. Plain then. Bran's voice did not rise. If anything, it dropped lower until men leaned to catch it, and the leaning bound them. If we go on as we have gone on, we will keep killing each other when the winter eats our fences. I would set a thing between us that does not rot in when the old wood rots. A thing that makes a path where men can walk from hearth to hill and call it lawful. Then? Glover's mouth twitched. Lawful for whom? For any who keep it, Bran said, and he let the words rest where he put them. It is not kneeling. The free will not kneel. It is not breaking houses to build tents. The houses will not make their roofs of skin. It is a path. Those who will walk may meet and trade and fight together when there is need. Those who will not can sit and freeze and starve and talk about how pure they are while they die. Bah. Manderly's laugh slunk out and took a turn around the roast like a cat. Your Grace has a gift for putting sugar on truth. I have men on the White Knife who trade with men who do not speak our words and eat things that look like frogs. I do not care if they flatter my banner if they bring me fish. I care if they steal my nets and take my boys. My father swore to the young wolf. My son swore to you. I have learned to be careful whose mouths I tie my oaths in. Their own, said Alice Karstark. Her chin was a small hill with frost on it. Let men put their oaths in their own mouths. Let them say, I will do this and not that, and let us cut off whatever part of them breaks it. There was an edge of laughter around that, and then a taking in of breath that made it clear no one knew whether they were meant to be amused or afraid. Bran let them decide. He felt the old tree listening. He felt the old winter holding the hall sweet as a hand cupped around a candle. The charter of hearth and hill, he said. And Wolkan stepped forward with the little horn, and the ink that had been warmed at the tree, as if that meant anything to any man but Bran. It begins with guest right, because everything in the north begins with a door opened and bread broken. Houses will be beholden to keep a hearth within 3 days' walk of any holdfast where a free camp may come in winter and not be turned away. Free camps will be beholden not to crowd a hearth past its wood and meat. If there is bread enough for 30 and 60 come, the 60 must split, or cut wood and slaughter with the 30 until there is enough. If they take bread without asking and leave shit and fire behind them, their debt is wood and meat again, but twice. And no, twice. Tormund grunted. Approving. He took meat like an oath and chewed it that way. Hills are commons, Bran went on, in all of the old places where the stones are set. If a man says this hill is mine because I put a fence around it, he must first pull the old stones and set them elsewhere. And if he can do that and not shake the bones of his house loose from under him, he may keep the hill. Until then, the hill is for deer and men who chase deer and for wind. And houses who put nets across the wind will answer to the hill. Damn? Manderley cocked an eyebrow. And who speaks for the hill when it complains its wind has been caught? The wind is a poor petitioner, your grace. Bran almost smiled. The hill speaks in its own time. Meanwhile, I speak for the hill. Nendawa. And for the hearth? Sansa asked. Her voice had a temper he recognized from the days when the world had tried to swallow it whole. Who speaks for the hearth when it is gutted by guests? The woman who keeps it, Bran said. And the murmuring in the hall went from wariness to thought. The charter gives the hearth mother's word the weight of a host's. If the host is away at war or drunk or dead, the woman who keeps his fire may bind or turn away as if she bore the name. If a man forces his way through such a door, the hill will meet him on his way home, and the house he returns to will help the hill take his blood price. Then, Karstark's blue light burned brighter. The Bear Island woman made a sound like steel coming clean. Glover's mouth became a line. Blood price, he said. Old talk. Old law, Tormund corrected, and there was a chill in the correction that was not entirely from snow. We've paid it with knives. You've paid it with hangings. It's the same coin. A man kills a man. The dead man's camp takes a piece out of the living man's camp, and they don't argue it. If the killer is poor, they take his back. If he is rich, they take his son. If he is brave, they take his arm and send him back to learn to work with one. If he's a coward, they take his throat and leave the rest. Makes men think when they reach for their knives. And if the killer is free, Glover asked, and the dead man is one of mine, then you come to their fire with your witnesses, Bran said. And the hill stands between. If a house refuses witness, the house brings its case to the stones, and if a camp refuses witness, the camp brings its case to the stones. Men will learn the stones again. What is the court? Manderley asked, amused beyond help. What is its roof? The sky, Bran said. And the roof is wherever men can't agree that the sky is enough. And then the weirwood is its roof. There was laughter then. Some because the image pleased. Some because men laughed when they did not want to weigh a thing any longer. Sansa let it run its course like a hound that will not be called back until it has taken one more turn around the yard. Then she raised a hand. Hearth, she said. Hill. Guessed right and blood price, commons and stones. These are words we can make meat of in a winter. Say more. Bran looked into the ink and saw a sky that had once been water. Steadings, he said. By the charter's word, the free may build steadings south of the wall and north of the King's Road on land that no house tills or holds under a roof. A steading remains a steading if its people keep it with their hands. If a house lays claim to a steading, it must maintain it, as a house maintains its own fields, and it must take in its people under its name. If the free people of a steading swear to a house, they do so with their own names, not as cattle, and if they break that oath, they go back to the hill they came from. They do not become thieves by leaving. They become travelers again. They become my problem again, Glover said. Men who take what they want because the wind says so. Bran shook his head. The movement was small, but it felt like moving a cart from a rut in a bitter road. The wind has told the free too many lies for them to be fooled so easily now, he said. They will not be driven south for meat that tastes of strange fat and small bread. They will stay because there is wood enough, and because when a child goes to a hearth, he will not be turned away into dark. Tormund had stopped eating. That meant more than words. He leaned his arms on the table, thick as tree limbs with old scars crawling like pale ivy. We don't do lords, he said. We did kings sometimes. It didn't sit well. You put a man in a fancy skin for long enough and the skin starts to itch, and he claw at it, and he burns down the tent. What you're saying sounds like lords. A little. And it sounds like not lords. A little. Now. It sounds like a bridge, Bran said. Tormund grinned. Bridges burn, but they save your feet until they do. Then we keep it wet, Bran answered. And that got him Tormund's laugh. The kind of laugh that could turn a winter's night into the kind men told stories about. The laugh ran down the tables and shook the cups, and went up into the roof beams, and made itself a part of Winterfell. They took the ink and moved it around the hall, not to sign. The charter had not yet enough bones to merit signatures, but to let men smell it. Men smell law like dogs. Smell rain. They know if it will break the ribs of the barn, or only the thatch. While they passed the horn, the small thing happened that would later be called the first test. Because men loved to tell stories as if they had known which moment mattered when it came and stood in front of them, wearing a plain face. A boy ran in and skidded on the refrozen patches where melted snow had pooled and cooled. He did not fall. He had the gift children have of turning a near fall into a sort of dance. He flung the door beam up, just as a soldier might with both hands, and a curse. And then he blinked, because he was in a hall where the air was warmer than his breath. He went red in the face from the heat that struck him. He wore the Night's Watch's old black, much mended, and a patch where the crow would be was instead a needle and thread. He saw Sansa first and dropped to a knee so fast he made a noise like a sack dropped on a table. Your Grace, he said. Our sheep, at the outstead by last hearth. They're gone. Half the hall made the sound men make when you tell them something that is both not surprising and entirely unwelcome. How many? Glover asked, the question coming short and without courtesy. Because if you grew up counting winter by sheep, you counted sheep as if they were your blood. 16, my lord, said the boy to him. He could not help himself. Lords were lords in the bone. Tracks run north. North, Tormund echoed. So flat the word was almost a threat. And 2 dogs, the boy added. Reckless now with the sense that news is a river and must come out. 1 limping. Men, Glover said coldly. Not wolves. Or wolves with shoes? Said Manderley. And that got him a glare so sharp it would have shaved him clean if he had turned his face into it. Where is your captain? Sansa asked the boy above the sudden machinery of talk in the hall. Dead, your grace, said the boy, and that threw silence like a net. He swallowed. Fell from the loft when the thieves cut the lambs loose. Broke his neck. He was a good man. His name? Bran asked. Names matter in winter. Give a thing that dies its name, and it will not come back tugging at your hem later because you owe it. Brett, the boy said. Brett Pike. He laughed like a donkey. Sansa's fingers moved as if she were braiding at the air. Her eyes slid to Bran. When he nodded, She stood. "Lord Glover," she said, and her voice was a little softer than it had been an hour ago, because grief had passed across it and left a handprint. "You will take men north at first light with Tormund Giantsbane, and treat this as the charter says it must be treated, though the ink is not yet dry. The charter says," Glover began. "It says you will bring witnesses," Bran said into the space he made with his breath. And a few faces turned toward him, as if to say he spoke too soon. He spoke as if his words had weight they did not yet carry. "The free do not deny that their camps have men in them who could have done this. Tormund does not deny it. So you will take witnesses. You will take a hearth mother if you can find one who will go. You will come to the stones, and you will ask the hill to speak. Now." "And if the hill is tired of our talk?" Glover demanded. He did not want to be told to ask a stone for the truth of a dead man. "Then I'll speak," Tormund said. He stood up as if it were not a thing to be noticed when a mountain rose. "And if any man in any camp north of here knows a goat that pisses like a king, I'll know him by the smell, and if he knows how to tie a knot blind, and it looks like the knot we use when we're stealing in a hurry, I'll know him by the way his hand lies when it comes down." He turned his head to the boy. "You smell their piss." The boy stared, startled, and then a little delighted that the world had turned so suddenly toward him. "No, sir. Next time you smell their piss," Tormund said, grave as a priest. "You smell everything. That's the first rule of living outside walls. You smell, and you listen, and you shut your eyes sometimes to see better." "Sir. Day." Glover made a noise that could not decide whether it was contempt or resignation. "Very well," he said. "We will go to the stones with our donkey laughing dead and our lambs in a sack, if we can get them back, and we will ask the sky to settle law." "Take Willa," Sansa said to the Bear Island woman. "If any hill tires of men talking, perhaps it will listen to a woman's silence." Willa Mormont. That was the name she wore tonight. Took that as if it were a priest's blessing and an insult both. "I'll listen to the hill," she said. "But if what it whispers is only men's lies, I'll tell it so." The hall had become a field. Men moved their minds as if they were placing themselves in little squares on a clean board. Night came down the windows and pressed its face to the glass. Somewhere a wind changed its mind. Bran watched. He felt the old root run under the floor like a vein and throb faintly, once, as if a great heart had missed a beat and found it again. That night, when the hall had turned back into a room where men slept on benches and wives bent over casks and tied them shut, Bran went again to the tree. He took no torch. He did not tell the guards. The God's wood holds more guards than any castle when it wishes. He lay back in his chair beneath the hanging leaves as if he were laying himself in a boat, and he let his eyes close. And when he opened them, he was inside the slow thinking again. It took him, but it did so gently, as men who have made their peace with a river will let it lift them and carry them a little way because it is easier than walking. He saw the hill that the morning party would climb to set their case before stones. He saw its stones not as they were, chipped and half buried and written on by lichen, but as they had been when men set them upright with swollen hands. There were 47. Men today would count them fewer. The earth has a way of keeping what it has been paid to keep, and stone sinks. But here they were 47, and around them were men with hair in braids and hair in knots, and hair cut short with knives. Children were there. A woman held a child so close, the child's ear was pressed flat. The words they spoke were not the words Bran knew now, but he knew them all the same. A word can die and its ghost live to go on speaking. A man stood in the center and cried out, and the earth under the stones took his cry and turned it, and the turning said, "Debt." Another man spoke, and the earth under the stones turned that, and said, "Hunger." Then a third, and the stones said, "Pride." Bran watched them lay these things down on the ground as if they were hides, and he watched the woman with the child step out and step around them as if they were holes. She had a bowl, like the bowl he had seen earlier, whatever century earlier even mattered, and she held it up and let snow fall into it, and she drank. Then she cried, and the earth drank that too. At last a boy stepped forward, trembling with the courage that lives between fear and shame. And he placed in the center a bundle of sheep's wool, blood-stiff. He did not speak. The hill did not require his voice. It knew. "Give wood and meat and a winter's service," the stones said, one by one, their mouths in the ground. "Send the boy to the dead man's hearth a year of cold, and let him fetch and carry, and keep the fire, and learn how a lamb's leg is jointed, and which dogs to trust, and which dogs lie. If he runs north forever, and never south again. If he stays, he can come back and be a man men will eat with." Bran emerged with tears cold on his cheeks. They had come freely. He did not like the feel of them, but he did not wipe them away. He slept with his eyes open a while in the chair, and when dawn came, it came like a rumor you wish to disbelieve and cannot. The party went north under a sky scraped thin. Glover on his lean, stubborn mare. Willa with a spear like a piece of tree that had decided to grow iron leaves. Tormund on foot, because he trusted his feet more than any horse that had not learned to run in the storms he had. The boy who had danced instead of falling ran with the men until his breath tore, and then he turned and came back, and smiled at Bran when he saw him watching from the yard, and bent double and retched in a drift, and came up with ice in his eyebrows. In the quiet that followed their departure, the castle did what castles do after men leave them. It exhaled. It let the heavy work of waiting press down. Sansa took her counsel in the solar. Manderley wandered the kitchens and came out with a handful of dried fish and a piece of gossip that he pretended wasn't fish at all. Karstark put her gloves back on and rode a nervous little mare around the yard, until the mare learned not to be nervous anymore. Bran went with Wolkan back to the words. "You write fast for a man who has to listen to stones," Wolkan said, trying to make a joke out of worship. "The stones speak slowly," Bran said. "So, I must move while they think." He set down the next bones of the charter. It came to him not like words but like the way you build a fire when you are very cold and your hands cannot afford mistakes. Gather tinder, then kindling, then larger wood, and be stern with yourself about the neatness of the pile. He wrote about winter service and summer rights. He wrote that the free could hunt on house land when snow lay and would keep off it when the plows made furrows. He wrote that a man who could call a hawk down to his wrist might call it over any lord's fence, and no one would cut the bird for trespass. He wrote that the watch on the wall, if the wall must be a watch again, would be watch for both hearts, and not a prison for bastards and orphans, but a place where those who lived between hearth and hill could stand and say, "Here is the line, and here we keep it, and here we remember why, and here winter is not an excuse to break the things we made when we were not afraid." He wrote until his hand shook. He wrote until the sun slid into a frost haze. He wrote until Sansa lay her fingers on his arm and said only his name, just Bran, the one that still could turn in him like a key and open the door into which he put everything else. He stopped then. There was no rage in him at stopping, only a recognition that the body is a house with winter on the roof and a fire in the belly, and that both must be kept, or there is no house. They were still eating, cleaning bowls with bread, the crumbs falling like a little snow on wood, when a man came in who did not belong anywhere. He had the look of those who have walked far and talked to no one while doing it. He pushed his hair back with both hands as if it were a hood he could take off, and then he looked down at those hands as if they had betrayed him by needing him. He wore a free man's boots, thick and patched, and a houseman's cloak cut to fall clean and not catch on thorns. He kept his eyes on Sansa, and then on Bran, and then on the space between them. When men do not know where power sits, they look at doorways. "I came south," he said without preface. His voice had been ground smooth by wind. "I brought meat for trade. Men took it before I got to a hall. I heard about a thing you're writing. What would that thing say about me?" "What is your name?" Sansa asked. "Rai," he said, and there were 3 smiles around the table, before any chose to be ashamed of them. He stood straighter. "I didn't choose it. It stuck. Rai. What would the thing say if you took meat by the road and didn't ask for bread at a door when there was one in sight?" Sansa asked. Her tone was so even it could not be trapped. Rai's mouth moved once. "I would owe wood and meat," he said in the manner of a child who has heard a rule and knows it will be used on him, and does not yet know whether that will be mercy or whip. And if you tried to give wood and meat, and the house turned you away because you were not theirs? She asked. Rai swallowed. I would go to a hill with stones, he said, and his hands made shapes in the air without knowing what they were doing, as if they were striking a tent. And if there were no stones? Manderley asked, because it is the duty of men with fish in their pockets to be the devil when the devil is needed. Then I would make some, Rai said. I would set them up, and I would call men, and I would say the hill is here. Because I am here and the stones are here because I put them here, and the sky is the same as its own self anywhere. Bran saw then that this was the boy the hill had shown him, with the bundle of wool. It was not the same face. No face is the same when years have had their way. But it was the same courage, coming out of the same dark well. What did you do with the meat? Bran asked. Rai looked at the floor, and then he looked up with a stubbornness that made his cheekbones start. Ate it, he said. Gave some to a woman who'd lost 3 babies and had milk that hurt her. Gave some to a dog with a face like a mummer's mask who followed me all night and bit anyone else walked near. The rest I ate. You might have come in to last hearth, Glover said, having walked back in as if the snow itself had allowed him to step through it without leaving a trail. There was frost in his beard and frost under his fingernails and on the line of his throat. Instead, you came in to me afterward, when I could not dangle your meat back out of your mouth by the bones. Rai looked at him with a kind of compassion that was odd and very old. I might have, he said. And if I had, a man at your door would have put a spear across it, because he did it last year and the year before, and his father did it, and the spear knew the way on its own. I didn't want to be killed by a spear that didn't even know my name. I would rather be killed by a man who was looking at me. Glover's mouth twitched. You'll do, he said, which was as close as a man like him comes to a winter's blessing. Tormund came in behind him. Snow on his shoulders like a pelt he would shrug off when he'd had his fill of playing beast. He carried something that had been wool, blood stiff, and now frozen into a little board. He set it on the table, and it went down with a noise that made the dogs lift their heads together. Blood price, he said. The hill wanted wood and meat and a winter's service. We stand by that, do we? We do, said Sansa without looking at Bran. It was his to say. She wanted him to say it. He did. We do, Bran said. Then this boy, Tormund jerked his head toward Rai without a glance to see whether this was the boy who should be a boy in this sentence. We'll go to Glover's hearth and keep a fire, and learn which dog lies and which dog hunts, and hell come back in a year with his hands not so hungry. The man who cut the lambs loose and made Brett Pike laugh like a donkey and then not laugh is already dead. He fell. The hill said that was clumsy justice and would stand if we stood it up. Tormund's beard cracked when he smiled. Also, the goat that pisses like a king belongs to a woman with one eye and a voice like a saw. She will come south when her husband's done pretending to be brave and find out whether your kitchens know how to make anything that doesn't taste like fish. She wants to see the fancy stones you people put on your walls. The relief that moved through the room was as plain as a gust stirring leaves. Men put their backs down and found their shoulders again. Glover stared at the blood-stiff wool long enough that the dogs began to look away, embarrassed at seeing a man think so hard in public. Bring the charter, he said at last roughly. Bring it here. If we're to be saved from each other by words, let the words be sharp and cold and fit the hand. They brought it. They did not sign it then. It was not ready. Bran had more bones to lay, more woods to gather and stack, and more places where men would try to poke their hands into the tinder, to see whether the fire could be unmade by a cleverness they had thought of at the last. But they read the thing out loud, and in the reading, it took on breath, the way a new calf does, a little angry at being forced into a world where it must learn to stand. In the days that followed, Winterfell became a place of small paths leading to one room where Wolken kept the draft on a board, and anyone who came to see it had to wipe their hands on a cloth that smelled of soap and mint first. The cloth was Sansa's idea. The mint was Wolken's. The two together made a rule that was almost a comfort. Men came and set a finger to a line and said, What does that word mean if a storm knocks a barn down? Women came and put a palm flat on the place that named the Hearth Mother, and they did not speak for a time, and then said, I will go to the stones with any who ask me, which in the north is a vow that has weight. Tormund came and laughed at a word that tried too hard to be pretty. Glover came and sliced a sentence in half with his hand and said, that goes there, you'll only trip on it where you put it. Karstark came and asked whether a steading that married 3 houses together had to take all 3 names, and if so, who gets named first when a man calls the roll before a raid. Manderley came and suggested, with more levity than he had the right to carry into the room, and yet he carried it anyway, that there should be a fish in the charter, if only because it would be a comfort to read about one when the river iced. Bran listened. He took the words away to the tree at night, and set them against the slow thinking until the parts that would not live fell off. He saw more hills. He saw more stones. He saw a steading built in a place where men had once dragged stones to the top of a rise and set them in a circle, because once that had seemed like the way to keep winter out. He saw a woman whose only name for a time had been the Red One, because her hair burned even under all that sky, and he watched her lift a child from a smoking hut and set him down in the snow and make the snow a medicine by the way she spoke. He saw wolves lying with their ribs up and not afraid because there were too many of them for fear to be useful. He wrote down a line that came from none of these and from all of them. When in doubt, do not drive men into dark. The dark is winter's mouth. Men in dark come out bitten. Give them a light, even if you do not like their faces in it. Walken frowned at that when he read it. It is not law, he said. It is, Bran said. It is the law that keeps all the others from becoming knives. On the 5th day, a barn burned. It was nothing grand. It was a small barn that had been full of last summer's straw, dried to a rustle and stacked in cunning ways so that a man could take a forkful from the middle without the sides collapsing, as if the hay were a house and could keep its roof without walls. It went up as if it had been waiting to do so since it was built. By the time men got there with buckets and shouts and hands that blistered as they pumped and cursed and laughed at the same time. Because if you do not laugh, you cry, and no man will have that from you in winter. The thing was a red bell singing skyward. It had been a bright day of clean sun and brittle air, and the smell of iron in the nose for no reason, but that the blood under your skin remembers its own weight. It was late afternoon when the alarm ran the yard like a dog that has got out of the kitchen and sees a goose. Sansa met the smoke with her face already set in that fine line that says nothing has surprised me since I grew out of my first mask. Bran came at his pace. Men made way. Who saw it? Sansa asked. Old Ben, someone said. He was pissing in the drift and looked up, and the whole side was on fire. And the first thought in every mouth, Sansa said calmly, is that one of Tormund's people did it. No one said yes. No one needed to. Bran's seeing did not need the tree for this. It needed only the hall and the yard and the way smoke writes itself on air and forgets. He extended himself downward and outward, the way a hand goes out to break a fall. He saw the barn as if he stood inside it. He smelled the way old straw holds the ghost of summer and mice and cat, and the way a spilled drop of lamp oil is a small coin of the sun embedded in all this dead gold. He saw a boy steal a kiss from a girl with hair the color of clean cedar bark, and they ran laughing across the yard in so much winter you could hear the laughter chip. He saw a squire from Lord Glover's retinue, drunk, by the weaving of his legs and the proud carefulness with which you carry your body when you know it's not yours for a time, take a lantern and bump the post with his shoulder as if the post owed him courtesy. The lantern swung. It fell. It broke. The straw drank the sun's coin, and then paid the sky back all at once with interest and a flurry of sparks like birds. Bran drew his breath, and it came cold and tasted of singe, and of a small shame he did not own. Fetch Lord Glover, he said very quietly. When Glover came, with his boots still unbuckled and ash on his cheek, Bran told him what he had seen in fewer words than it takes to make a lie. Glover's face did not change. Then it changed in a way that would have been funny if it had happened to a boy, and was not funny at all in a man. He went red because he had put a shape to what his mouth had been ready to say when he saw fire, and that shape had been free folk, and instead, now it had to be one of his own. His name, Glover said through teeth that had been taught not to chatter. I do not know his name, Bran said. I know he will have a burn on his hand where he tried to beat the lantern and learned something an uncle should have taught him about oil. Glover nodded once. Then he turned as if he had just remembered he had a body, and the body had weight, and the weight belonged to the day. When they brought the boy, because of course it was a boy, winter breeds men slowly, and the in-between tries too hard to own what it cannot. He held his hand like a man who had picked up a coal and pretended he had meant to. His eyes were the color of a fence rung. He shook, and then when he saw the free folk stepped back to let men of the house pass, he stopped shaking out of pride alone. Glover put him under the eyes of the charter. By this, he said, not to Bran, not to Sansa, but to the wood with the ink on it. What happens now? Bran did not make any of it a moment. He did not make a speech to teach the hall that it had been about to accuse the wrong men, and that law is a river that takes filth the same way it takes leaves. He only said the words he had written. He owes wood and meat to the house whose stores he has spoiled, he said. He owes work with the free folk, who have been accused under a breath they did not draw, to make good bread and lay a floor that does not burn the next time a boy with pride and beer comes too near it. He owes shame to himself. The charter does not try to keep a man from that. It only tries to keep shame from becoming the name of a hall. It only tries to keep shame from becoming the name of a hall, the boy cried. Men do that less than they should in public. He did it because the flesh will out. Tormund clapped him once on the back with a hand like a branch and said, Men burn things when they are drunk. I once burned a tent I was inside, and then made a new one out of what I was wearing. You can learn to do anything with enough shame. Damn. The laughter that followed was soft and made of relief and common sense. It was not the laughter that makes enemies. It was the laughter that makes brothers of men who might have been enemies if not for the day's wind. That night, when the barn was only a black skeleton and the snow had written its corrections over the day's careless words, Bran took the charter in his hands and read what was there. He found places where his words had wanted to be beautiful and beaten them back into usefulness. He found passages where he had let pity do law's work, and he hardened them until they could be picked up and used in a storm. He found little places where Sansa's braid had caught and left one silver hair, and he laid the hair in the brazier and watched it twist and make a tiny light and go. When he slept, he dreamt of stones being set upright in a ring again. He watched boys carry them with ropes and songs that had only one note because breath came short. He watched girls stand and look at the stones as if they knew a time would come when men would ask them to speak for the hearth and the hill both. He watched a tree grow in the center, and then in the morning, still with the taste of bark on his tongue, he said to Wolkan, "We should make one." "One what, your grace?" "A new ring," Bran said. "Not far. Near enough that a man can reach it when he is given a choice between anger and the path. We will set stones ourselves, the house and the free, together. We will call it the witness. When men say, go to the stones, there should be stones to go to that, remember, being set by hands that did not hate each other." Menemy shall. Wolkan's eyes filled. He did not do that often. He was a man who saved water. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "Yes, your grace." They chose a low rise west of the weirwood pond, a place the sun found kindly in late afternoon. Men came with sledges. Women came with levers. Children came with questions. The first stone was brought out of a ditch where a wall had fallen down 2 kings ago, and no one had the heart to set it right again. The second came out of a riverbed like a tooth taken from a slept beast. The third was already there, half buried with its face toward the ground like a thing ashamed, and they dug around it and coaxed it up as if it were an old man who had fallen asleep and forgotten how to stand. Tormund lifted. Glover lifted. Willa pushed with her shoulder and snarled at the stone as if the stone had called her a liar. Ace Karstark set her hands under one edge and said a phrase in a language that had not been spoken in that place for a long time, and did not know she knew it until it came out of her mouth and went and hung in the winter air like a bead. Bran did not lift. He watched. He watched, and he set his hand on the new-made earth that would hold the stone and thought down into it until the earth felt the hand as roots do. A thing to grow around. They made the ring with no altar in it, no carving. They did not write on the stones. They let them be what they had always been. Things that would be where men left them when the men had gone. They stood back when it was done. The light did what light does in a northern winter when it finds something that will hold it. It lingered. Sansa came and took Bran's hand. His glove this time. And he was glad of it because his hand would have told him too much about the warmth of hers. And raised it, no sign or flourish, only because a woman sometimes takes a man's hand in winter to say, "We did this. We will keep it together." "Witness," she said. "Witness." The ring said. If stones say anything. The wind ran through it in a new way now, and birds tried it with their wings, and decided this bit of air was somehow thicker, and a boy with a burn on his hand stood at its edge, and discovered that there is a way to look at stone that makes it look back. The charter of Hearth and Hill slept that night on Wolken's board. It was almost a thing. A few bones needed setting. The meat still stuck too heavily to the place that named the watch, and not heavily enough to the place that named winter service. The line about light and dark sat where Bran had put it like a cat, curled on a stool you hope the Lord will not ask you to move. The men who had denied words would save them came and stood and rated in their mouths without saying anything, and then went away and pretended to spit. In the morning, a raven came and made the sound that means other ravens have been elsewhere. Bran looked up and saw them carried on a line like stitches. He felt the pull begin in him again. The one that says kingship is coming south on the wind, and the world will try to set you on a chair you do not want. He set his hand on the ring of stones instead. "Not yet," he told the wind. It listened, like all old things do when spoken to in their own voice. A week later, a woman with one eye and a voice like a saw came into the yard and asked for the kitchens. A goat followed her and pissed on a wall like a king. Men laughed until their ribs hurt, and then stopped because the winter line was thin today, and they could see through it into a spring you did not dare to expect. Glover nodded to Rye when he counted the sacks of wood the boy had cut in the last 7 days, and said nothing else. Tormund lay on a bench in the sun, and told a girl with a scar under one eye a story about a bear that was really a man that was really a bear, and did not care which. Sansa went out to the ring and stood in it, and closed her eyes as if prayer could be made out of nothing but breath. Wolken cut new quills without looking at his hands and did not draw blood. Bran sat under the heart tree and felt the charter in the castle, the way a man feels bread rising in a warm place. The air felt richer to him. He smelled mint and ink and old wood and new storehouse straw. Bite. He felt the stones of the witness settling themselves, taking the weight of men's eyes and not cracking. He felt the slow thinking in the roots and knew it loved this work, not because it was new, but because it was old. Old as the first time a man realized winter was not something you beat with a club, but something you learned to make, not hate you. He opened his eyes. The tree watched him, face calm, and the red leaves like hands that had just washed and were clean. "You keep," Bran said to it, and it said nothing, because keeping does not require words. He looked toward the hall where the charter slept and where his sister stood, and beyond the hall to where a piece of the sky was a road, and beyond that to where men still killed each other for fences. The snow would eat by dawn. The work would go on. The path between Hearth and Hill would be laid and torn and laid again. Men would forget and remember and forget. The ring would stand while they did. He let that knowledge sit in him, like a small fire in a small room. You have learned how to keep because you have known the cold. Bran took up the quill. He warmed the ink. He wrote, "Ya, Kani, Adi, Etche, Isin Demtim Diste, El, Enwe, Ajelu Borer, I." The days that followed laid themselves down like clean boards in a cold room. Men walked them carefully at first, listening for the complaint of age, the soft moan of rot, and finding instead a steadiness that surprised them. The witness ring learned the weight of feet. Its stones knew how to be looked at. They took the gaze without flinching and gave nothing back but the sense that something older was looking with you, and that you could mislead your neighbors and deceive yourself. But the earth would not be fooled by the little dances men used to make wrong seem clever. Snow wore itself thin. Sunlight, brittle as spun sugar, touched the wide, pale yard and left little wet fingerprints behind. In the mornings, the breath of the kennels went up in plumes like small heralds before a procession. In the evenings, the hall ate men and turned them out again, warmer, quieter, with their pride rubbed to a shine by shared meat and beer. Men used the witness like a new word their mouths loved the taste of. They added it to sentences that did not require it, and found those sentences better for it. Bring it to the witness. Ask the witness. The witness will settle it. Lie if you must, but not at the witness. Women used it too, and differently. I will go to the witness with you. Put the bread on the table. If you lie at the witness, may the stones demand you clean the oven for a year with straw that cuts your hands. Rai learned the names of dogs. He learned the scholars among them, and the fools, the liars, and the ones who were honest enough to tell you with a sideways eye that they would steal from your bowl as soon as you turn. He learned wood by its sound and meat by its touch. He broke joints clean, not with showy speed, and fetched water with his head bowed just enough to show he had heard, and not so much that he was begging. Glover watched him with the unkind, careful attention you give to a tool that you would like to trust, but that will draw blood if you hold it wrong. Once, seeing the boy's burn start to split in the cold as he carried a sack of kindling across the yard, he said, "Flat as a slate. You'll wear a wrap over that, or I'll send you to the saw bench and we'll shorten your hand to fit your work." Rai wrapped his hand. If he hated Glover, he did it privately. In public, he saved his hate for the way the wind comes around corners, always a little earlier than you expect. He warmed his hatred like a small, useful thing in his belly, and used it to fuel the next load and the next, until some days the hatred had worked so hard it slept, and he was surprised to discover there was any left to wake. He went to the witness, the first time, with a woman whose name he did not know, and whose face, within a day, he could have found in a field of 1,000 women by the way she squared her shoulders before a door. She had the new weight of a child grafted to the old weight of disappointment. Her husband was drunk. She said. He had broken the hinge off the house. The hinge, not the door. It matters where men break things. He had eaten their best cheese with men she did not know, and was now sleeping it off with one of their blankets in the barn. He had taken a knife to a pot she had seasoned for years to make it give up the last meat clinging to it, and she wished him a winter's service with a house that would teach him what pots are for. She said this without heat. She said it as if she had taught herself to use words the way you use an awl. Sharp, precise, making holes where the leather wants them. At the witness she looked at the stones, and then at Bran, and then at the space where men stand when they would confess, and she did not make a scene of anything. When her husband came, sullen, half hungover, not yet ashamed, Rai stood behind Glover and felt the way a field feels when a heavy wagon has gone over it too many times. Rai looked at Bran then. He wanted to know whether this man could see him the way he sometimes felt seen when he walked past the heart tree and the carved face took a breath he could not hear. Bran did not look at him. He looked at the stones. He listened. When the man had done sneering and the woman had done speaking, and a neighbor had cleared his throat and said, because the wind in winter demands we tell each other's truth, that the man had cut the pot to spite the stew and would do it again if mockery did not taste sour to him soon, Bran said, "Winter service, a season, to the potboy under Lord Glover's hand, and you will bring a hinge you have made with your own hands to your wife, and fit it so cleanly, the door will not know it has ever been broken. If it clatters, you go back to the potboy again." Benderwand. The man jerked as if a horseflea had stung him. Pride lifted its head to speak, then looked around the ring of stone and laid it back down quietly. "A season," he muttered, and Rai wondered whether the man would hate as privately as he did, and whether they would recognize each other in the yard by the way they wore it as warmth. In kitchens and stables, in lofts and yards, the charter of hearth and hill became a ladle and a yoke and a hand on a shoulder. It was not signed, it was used. Men who had come to Winterfell to spit at it left with a sentence in their mouths that they found themselves biting into and chewing before they realized they had hunger enough for the whole of it. The witness taught the hall a new posture, bodies leaning forward not to fight, but to catch words blandly spoken, the kind that make law. Hands open to show nothing hidden. The world is mostly hands and faces. The charter respected that. Walken expanded the draft until it looked less like a skin for a small beast and more like a cloak you might pull around you on a walk in a hard wind. Sections grew under Bran's quill with their own inward grain, and he learned to keep the knife with that grain, lest the piece split when he did not want it to. He wrote the oath for hearth mothers. I hold the bread and the salt. I hold it so that hunger does not make wolves of men, and so that men do not make wolves of themselves. If I give bread to those who break it, may my own mouth remember. If I salt the lies of men as if they were meat, may my own tongue go dry. The door is mine to open and mine to close, and I will answer for it to stones and to winter both. He wrote the form of a winter service promise. I take your work into my fire. I will not work you to death. I will not let you go idle. I will teach you what is needful and not what is spite. At the end of the cold, I will send you out clothed enough that the world will not bite you for want of wool. He wrote the recognition of old places and the way men would walk through them. Where the bones of hills stand in circles, men will keep their voices low. If a woman sets a bowl there and lets the sky fill it, you will not kick it over. If a child sleeps there because his mother is tired, you will step around him like you would step around a fire that has been banked. Glover brought him a difficulty like a knotted rope, nets cut on the white knife. Manderley's men spat fish scales and curses in the same breath and swore by salt and by their father's cold bones that the camp on the far bank had a knife that liked hemp. The free men swore by their mother's milk and their father's empty hands that no soul on that bank had so much as breathed on a net in 10 moons. And why would they, with a river fat as a sow right there, and fish the size of a man's thigh rolling over in the sun as if begging to be taken? Witness, then. Witness in a place where stones do not rise out of the ground with any heat in them, down by the river where the ground is so soaked with old water, it sighs under your feet and makes a fool of your boots. They went to a low bank where someone had set 3 big round stones up ages ago, and men had used them since to beat fish clean. The stones' faces glittered faintly with old scales that had fused themselves to the rock and made a strange skin. Manderley's boy, Marlin, full of appetite and sarcasm in equal measures, looked like a man who has been forced to apologize in a room full of men he despises. Beside him stood a fishwife with arms like a blacksmith's and a tongue sharper than any sword drawn that day. Across the wet piece of world stood a man with hair braided with bits of bone and teeth. Goat teeth by the look. Men's teeth are too white and a little too sad, and a woman who would not take her boots off as courtesy asked because she did not see why mud that had taken hold of her soles all winter should be an offense to anyone now. Bran did not bring soldiers. He brought time. He stood and let the river go about its work. He watched gulls. He listened to the way the reeds spoke to each other when the wind slopped across them. He tasted cold and fish and humility at the back of his throat, because rivers do that to kings. They remind you that your mouth is only a mouth. He asked the fishwife to show her cut nets. She did. He asked the bone-braided man to show his camp's hands. He did. Slowly, swallowing the urge to display the middle finger as a sign, the hands told their stories. This one's a liar. This one's honest but impatient. This one has a notch where a hemp rope laid a lesson across skin. This one's smooth because it had been living on rabbit and snow and has not seen a rope in a season. It's ice, Bran said finally, and let himself enjoy the look of insulted pride that came and went on all their faces like sun through cloud. Ice has no hands. It cuts worse than anything men make and leaves no clean edge. See? He took a line and showed the ragged place where the river had taken hold, spun it, and made it a knife. The debt is to the river. Go to the witness. Bring wood for men who fish in cold up to their thighs. Bring salt and burn the old scales off these stones so they can start again clean. Ben? The fishwife blinked and then laughed and said, The river won't eat my wood, and Bran said, No, but the men will, and then they will owe the river with their good work, and the river does not forget when men owe it good work." The bone-braided man smiled in spite of himself at hearing sense spoken in a voice that sounded to him like a boy's and a winter's both. The two sides said thank you without saying it, and went off in opposite directions chewing fish. Sansa watched from the bank, leaning on a spear someone had handed her while no one was paying attention to who was lending things to the Lady of Winterfell. There were reeds caught in her furs. She looked like a woman who could lie down in the mud and rise, and the mud would be improved by the contact. When Bran came up to her, she handed the spear back, and the man who took it blushed as if he had been caught indulging in a joke too soft for his station. "You make it sound simple," she said. "It is," Bran answered. "The river cut. The men will mend. The debt is to all of us if we don't say it's to the river. And if it had been a knife, then a hand would have been cut," Bran said. "In law, I mean," he added mildly, because he had learned that when men are cold, they do not always understand his simplest phrases. Work, wood, meat. Shame. Service. It is all cutting. I try to choose places where the cut will heal and leave a mark one can be proud to trace with a finger later on and say, "She did not say that he spoke like a tree. He did not say that she had learned to listen like one." They stood and watched the river be alive and not care. The mountain clans came down like weather. Wolves, Norries, Harklays, Littles. They wore the world differently. It hung on them as if they had made a pact with it. "We will not lie about what we are. Do not lie about what you are. Leave us to do our work, and we will leave you to do yours unless you do it poorly, and then we will help you do it better whether you will or no." They looked at the witness with respect and a little disdain. Stones know a man by his knees. The clansmen had knees that bowed to nothing lightly. The first thing they brought was a girl. They said she had been promised to a boy who had died last summer, and now the boy's uncle wished to hold her to the promise, because his house wanted the tie and the girl's house was small and too proud for its place. The girl did not talk. She looked like a bird that would bite you if you tried to put your hand around it for its own good. "Promise is a thing men make, because they do not trust their own memories," said an old Little whose beard looked as if it had been stolen from a bear and then trained with patience. "We do not hold children to promises made for them. We hold men to theirs. The boy is in the ground. His uncle can go lie down beside him if he likes. The girl will marry when she wishes." "Who says?" demanded a Risewell man who had come with the girl like thorns come with a rose. "Unavoidable, a little cruel, not entirely unlovely." "Who says?" "The witness," said the Little, as if that were the end. And then, because he saw the south of the hill in these men, like a stain that might be worth washing, or might be worth cutting away, he looked at Bran. Bran did not look at Sansa. She had learned not to give him her eyes at the witness. He did not look at Tormund, who tilted his head back to watch a bird no one else could see and whose mouth was full of unsaid laughter. He looked at the girl. Her jaw set. He nodded to her. "Speak," he said. She said nothing. "Then bring a bowl," Bran said softly. "Let the sky fill it." Walken found a bowl. It was a plain wooden thing that had known soup and milk and a little blood. They set it down in the center of the ring. It did not snow. It did not rain. The sky was a pale coin with old scratches, and none of them aligned to a hole. The girl looked at the bowl, and then at Bran as if to say, "If you make me wait for the sky, I will hate you for as long as I have breath." He smiled. He did not say what he knew, which was that law is patience dressed in simple clothes. In the end, because the day refused to bless them with a sign that fools could point at, Sansa stepped into the ring and spat into the bowl. It was not disgust. It was the oldest offering. Water that is yours because you made it. She looked at the Riswell, and at the Little, and then at the girl. And then she turned to the stones as if there were ears somewhere that were not attached to skulls. "The witness has water," she said. "We may speak." Bran put his hand on the nearer stone, and by that polite little deceit of the body, he allowed himself a longer sight. He did not fall into it. He watched what had been. Men talking. A boy showing off at last harvest. A girl cutting her hair with a knife and cutting her thumb and sucking it to keep the blood in her. He watched what might be. A man with a weak chin and a nice wife and a beautiful horse and a deep unhappiness because he had not chosen any of these things and did not know how to love what he had been given. Promises bind men, Bran said. Not women, not children. Men. When men make promises about women and children without their leave, they are promising their own shame. If you wish to keep it, hold it as tight as you like. The witness will not make the girl hold it for you. The Risewell opened his mouth. Sansa shook her head 1 degree to the left. It was enough. He closed it again. The little grunted. The girl smiled in a way that made Rye think of axes. She went away with her hair like a flag. News arrived very quietly, which is how large things come when men are busy with smaller things they mistake for larger. A raven dropped like a flaw in the sky into the rookery, and Wolken fed it gently and read what it carried and did not hurry to tell anyone until he had arranged the words in his mouth. So that the least foolish of them would fall out first. He came to Bran in the Godswood because he understood something about attention and how to catch it without bruising it. From White Harbor, he said. A ship came up the bight with a sail it should not have had, or so Marlon Manderley says. He says there's a kraken on the wind again. Bran watched a leaf let go of a twig and find the ground as if it had chosen to, not been forced to. Have they taken anything? He asked. Only fright, Wolken said. So far not. Marlon says his men laughed when they saw black sails, and then did not laugh when a small boat came in under their noses at night, and took their nets while they were out shaking blankets, and calling after a dog who had smelled something it liked better than home. He says there are men with knives in their teeth and more hunger than sense down the stony shore, and they fancy the cold makes the world cheaper. Meow. Sansa came while Wolken was speaking. She had a way of making the Godswood less solemn by entering it, not because she was disrespectful, but because she made solemnity lay its tools down for a time. She listened. She and Wolken had learned to share that act between them without stepping on each other's toes. Kraken, she said, tasting the old bad story. It always smells worse when it's dead, I find. We'll need more than law for this. Law feeds spears, Bran said. Bring them to the witness, not the raiders. Our men. If they're going to bleed, let them remember what for. Them? They called the houses whose shorelines had always been more rumor than fence. Risewell, Hornwood, Tallheart, men with boats more often than horses. Men who knew the shape of a bay by how it sang at night. They called the mountain clans, because a mountain learns how to deal with the sudden. The sea is only a mountain that moves too much. They called Tormund, because men who have slept with the wind make friends with the sea faster than men who have tried to keep it out with good doors. They met at the witness. Men who had thought it foolish to stand among stones when there were blades to be sharpened, came and found themselves sharpened. Bran let the talk run, and then stand, and then turn, and then come back on itself like a hound that cannot quite find the scent, because the grass is full of fox and water both. When the noise was enough, he said, if you find them ashore, the law holds them. If you find them on the water, bring what you can bring to the witness, and burn the rest. The witness doesn't speak on the water. It never has. It will not start now. Bam? Manderley's boy nodded, as if that were a phrase he would like to sing. Bring what we can bring, he said. And what of men who come with their bellies full of other men's fear? What of that kind of hunger? Does the witness have a mouth for it? Shane does, Sansa said. Bring them back one at a time with empty nets, and sit them here in front of stones and feed them meat, while we speak to them like they were children who have killed an old dog. See if they have pride enough to choke on it. Tormund's laughter went up like a column of smoke. I have sat men down and made them tell me stories about their mothers, and after that they never looked at me the same. Ben's a good way to keep a man from being your enemy at night. He can't make a monster out of you if he's picturing you as a boy being smacked with a wooden spoon for stealing pies. They went, then. Sentries along the shore. Men with rope and hooks because raiders think climbing is a new way to be born. And there's no better way to greet a new birth than with a rope that knows how to help a man down. The first small boat they caught had 2 men in it, and a boy who called anyone with a spear, "Sir," and meant none of it. The men spat and began to tell lies immediately. The boy tried to tell the truth and tripped over it. They brought all 3 to the witness. It was comical, and then it was not. "What are your names?" Sansa asked. "Garin," said one. "Sullen." "Garin," said the other, irritated. "You cannot both be Garin," Manderley said. "It is an ugly song." "My father liked it," the second Garin said, and immediately looked embarrassed, as if fathers were contraband. "And the boy?" Bran asked. "Sprat," said the boy, caroling misery. "They call me Sprat because I don't yet have whiskers, and I don't know a woman, and my mother says a sprat runs with the school without knowing why. Only because it doesn't want to be alone. Your mother is wiser than these 2 men." Sansa said, "Garin and Garin, you came ashore and cut nets. The river would have forgiven you, because it forgives everything until spring if you ask it. The sea does not forgive. You came on the sea. You'll pay in wood and meat and a season of service, and no boat shall carry you again under a black sail, as long as you breathe north of the neck. If it does, the men who carry you will owe the witness an arm, and you will owe it your tongue." "Nender, your tongue?" Sprat repeated, fascinated and terrified. "So, you will not lie at doors and on decks," Sansa said. "A man with no tongue can still pull a net, can still learn to listen, can still be a man." "And now?" Garin, one of them, it no longer mattered which, made a face that said he would like to make a joke about that, and then show his friends how brave he was by not making it. He shut his mouth. "What of me?" Sprat asked. "If I tell you where the other boats are, will I lose anything else? I have nothing anyone wants." "You have your name," Bran said. "If you bring other men in out of the dark, you can choose another that you are less ashamed of later. Names are cheap and expensive. We can set them on you like a cloak. You will pay wood and meat with those men. You will sleep by their fire and learn how a rope is tied by a hand that is not trying to pull a woman down into a boat without asking her if she knows how to swim." "Nenderol," Sprat cried without shame. "You do not ask a fish not to be wet. There were deaths. The law does not pretend to be summer. A man with a butcher's arms and a fish's eyes took a knife to a hearth mother's door because he had promised himself in his heart, where a man can conjure any strength and any virtue if he is alone long enough, that he would be stronger than any door when he needed to be. He was wrong. The man who stood with the hearth mother that night had a spear and a quiet courage, and he used both without speech, and the butcher died with a dog worrying his boot and trying to pull it off because the dog had learned that boots sometimes hide me." They brought the man to the witness with the blood still part warm in his clothes, and set him down on the earth, and said nothing for a long time. Tormund went and stood with his hands behind his back, like a boy called forward at a feast, to recite something before the meat arrives. "The hill wants his hand," he said at last, very lightly. "It has both." Willa Mormont's voice was iron wrapped in moss. She had come because this was the sort of thing that would become a story, and she liked to be present when stories were still honest. "What will the hill want from the rest of us?" "Wood," Bran said. "Meat. Shame. Winter's service for the men who loved him. A place at the hearth for the victim when the dark comes early, and she cannot bear to sleep alone with the sound of the door in her memory." "And the man at the door?" Karstark asked. She had come late and early both. Like Winter. She always did. His spear did the law. The law must do something for him. "Da." "It will," Bran said. And he set it down so matter-of-factly that men only realized later that the words had done what they were meant to do. They had made a thing. The charter pays the man who keeps the door as if he had worked a season in winter service. Wood, meat, and the acknowledgement at the witness that his hand was the hill's hand. We will make that a phrase. There will be times it is used to adorn poor work, but it will be there when we need it." The phrase made a small knot in the charter. Men ran their fingers over it later and felt where it had been tied tight with blood. Work like this brings music. The boy who played the reed, Crowkiller's son, took to wandering the yard with his little bone pipe, and something about the way his breath threaded into the cold air and came back to him made men lighten their shoulders. Sometimes he played at the witness and women stopped on their way with baskets and listened and allowed themselves to imagine a time when they were old and not afraid, because music gifts that. Once the boy fell asleep in the ring with the reed still in his hand, and Tormund came by and put his own rough cloak over him, and then spent an hour yelling at anyone who passed within reach, that if they woke the boy he would make them eat their own boots, buckles and all. Rai watched this with the same faint confusion he often felt when men were kind without being asked. He became better at the work of fires and the work of hands. He cut straight. He lifted well. He turned his head toward sense the way a plant does toward light. Glover noticed that the boy's hatred tasted thinner and more nourishing, as if it had been reduced properly in a clean pot and the scum skimmed off. One morning Glover took him out to the witness and made him stand where men who boast stand, and said, in a tone that made it clear, this was not a kindness, "Tell the stones your work." Rai did. He talked about wood. He talked about the sound an old beam makes when you put a new house around it and you haven't yet taught the house to breathe together, and how you fix that sound. He talked about meat, where it wants to be parted, and why trying to use steel where patience will do is foolishness. He talked about doors and hinges, and what wind does to both, and why a hinge is a promise, and a door is only a hope. When he was done, Tormund cried, "By all the gods, I've never bothered to learn. Boy, you'll make a good wife." And Rai laughed with the others, and Rai laughed with the others, and discovered that being laughed at by men you do not hate is a different thing than he had thought. Bran took all this into himself and did the thing the tree had taught him. He returned it to the world, changed only by the shape of his seeing. He wrote. He pruned. He set aside. He put bones where flesh had insisted on being pretty. He scratched out, ashamed and unashamed. He put the charter in Sansa's hands at night and took it back in the morning after it had slept beside her sense. Because the charter loved her caution the way a house loves a well-swept floor. In the afternoons he sat by the witness and said nothing at all, and let the ring learn him the way places learn those who sit in them, without asking them to. He thought sometimes of his father, and of the way law had sat on Eddard Stark like a clean shirt, plain, serviceable, a little scratchy, and he was grateful for the scratch. There were those who did not come to the witness except with a sneer. They were not many, they were exactly enough. A Risewell man, bitter with the taste of old debt that had never been repaid because both men who remembered it were dead and only the words remained. A White Harbor cousin, with fine new gloves and a contempt for anything that was not boats or songs about boats. A nameless pair from south of the Barrowlands who sold salt and stole second sons. Sansa dealt with them by seeing them clearly. Bran dealt with them by not seeing them at all until they did something that forced his eyes. Then he saw them so entirely that they wished he would look away. Once, in a thin morning while Frost wrote elaborate letters on the windows, and no one had yet had the nerve to translate them, a man stood under the gallery and shouted that the charter was a trick to get the free to kneel, and that its words were a net like the Manderleys, and that any man who loved the hill would take a torch to the witness. He had the look of a person who has climbed onto a chair in a crowded room and discovered, to his horror, that the chair is rickety and the room only wants him to fall so it can get on with its day. Tormund walked out to him and said, in a conversational tone, "I burned a tent once that I was inside. I don't recommend it." The man blinked. Tormund went on, "If you light the witness, the only thing you'll learn is that stones don't burn well, and that all the people you want to impress don't like the smell of your hair on fire. Sit down. Eat bread. If you hate it after, hate it with your mouth full. It sounds more convincing." The man sat. He ate. He hated a little less afterward because bread is a sedative if it is warm and salted right. Sansa gave Wolkan a list one day. written in the small neat script of a person who has had to press meaning into too little space and has learned to make space obey. The list had no title. It did not need one. It read, hearths, distances between, 3-day rule, markers along King's Road north of the Long Lake, messenger women, which houses have them, which steadings, teach them the witness phrases, teach them to carry bowls, shame tokens, a strip of red cloth, worn around the left wrist during service, remove it at the witness, with witnesses, winter service records, kept by hearth mothers, duplicated by house clerks, recited annually at the witness at first thaw, dispute ring south of Barryton, who to send, Wools? Norries? Consider sending Manderley boy. He remembers to laugh and not to drink too much before he speaks. Blood price set rate. Do not fix in stone. Keep it as wood measures, by cold and need and the year's bread. Write a line to that effect. Dogs. Bran read and smiled. Dogs was all it said, and yet it said everything a line would have spoiled. He wrote the line about blood price and the year's bread in language that would annoy men who liked ledgers. He wrote the 3-day hearth rule into the bones so that a man could trace it with his finger and find comfort when he woke shivering, and the fire had gone down and the door looked like a hole into the thing the world becomes when the sun forgets us. He made the red strip rule gentle and stern both. It would not mark a man forever. It would mark him long enough to help his shame go to work. He wrote in a place about messenger women that made men shift in their seats when they read it, and then nod because they knew better than to say what they were thinking. That you could not trust a woman to cross the snow with news in her belly, and then be shown wrong by a woman who had crossed the snow with a child in her belly and a spear in her hand. Dogs? He asked a day later, as if the word were a dare. We should name them. Sansa said. Sudden, fierce. Not all of them. The ones who keep doors. The ones who remember children's footsteps. The witness should have a book of dogs. Damn they. Walken smiled in a way that made him look very nearly young. I would read that, he said. The witness acquired a bowl, and then 3, and then a woman who came every morning with water she had carried herself from the well by the godswood, and set it in the center to say, here we begin. Men began to bring small objects and place them at the ring's edge in the manner of children testing the gravity of a parent's attention. A piece of line from a net, a bent nail, a bird bone. None of it was law. All of it was the substance law feeds on if it is not to grow hollow. At last, there came a day when the air smelled of trapped water, and the fields under their snow were impatient. Bran looked at the charter and knew he could no longer call it bones and meat without insulting it. Somehow it had made itself a face. It could look back. He sent for Glover, and Manderley, and Karstark, and Willa, and the mountain clans, and the free who had walked the witness ring so much their feet wore a little shine into one place on the ground. He sent for Tormund. He did not send for Sansa. She came before Walken could be sent, because sometimes the message arrives before the messenger. They gathered in the hall. The charcoals had been raked until they were a bed of angry red coins. The banners looked like things cut out of the day and arranged indoors. Outside, dogs barked as if practicing their names for the book Walken would one day write, and no one would ever finish, because all the books that matter are either not begun or not done, and we live between those two endings. Bran had Walken bring the charter in the good leather case, but he did not put it on the high table. He had men bring a plank, long, clean, smelling of sap and sawdust, and set it on trestles on the floor where any foot could knock it. He had them lay the charter there. He had them pour a bowl of water and a bowl of salt beside it. And then, because a room full of men requires an order for their attention to settle like dust, he did a simple thing. He set bread beside the salt. Not signing, Tormund muttered to Willa. Eating. Both, Willa said. Bran said, if you will hold this with me, hold it now. He did not say sign. He did not say pledge. Those words have their uses. He did not need them today. Take bread, take salt. Say your name and set some part of you down that you will not miss until the day you see it and you are glad it is still there." They did it clumsily and well. Glover took bread and salt and said, "Robert Glover, son of Galbart, who taught me to keep my back straight and my word. If you had asked me to sign, I might have cut my name wrong. This is better." He set down a small piece of the old gate from deep wood motte he had kept in his pocket since the day it had fallen, and he had learned the weight of loss. Manderley took bread and salt and said, "Marlon Manderley, grandson of Wyman, son of Wylus, fisherman's curse and a cook's blessing, who promises to make fewer jokes when men are tired." And he set down a fishhook that had slain as many fingers as fish. Karstark took bread and salt and said, "Alice Karstark, daughter of a name that I have hammered back into a shape I can hold without cutting myself." And she set down a small iron token hammered out of some old chain and stamped with a star that had not meant anything until she made it mean something. Willa put down a knife. Tormund put down a small twisted cord that might have been an amulet or might have been a child's toy, and did not say which. The mountain clans put down things that were meaner than they looked and looked meaner than they were. The free came forward last because they did not want to be seen as waiting to see how much of the meat the houses would take before they got to the table. Crowkiller's boy played a line on his reed. The woman with one eye and the goat with the king's bladder came and took bread and salt and said, "Brilla," and put down a polished piece of bone that might have been a knuckle bone and might have been a piece of the goat's horn. Rai came, his burned hand wrapped well, and took bread and salt and said, "Rai," and then hesitated. "What?" Tormund asked, far too loud, because he believed in breaking silences like ice where you can see the fast water underneath. "I don't have anything of mine," Rai said. He meant, "Everything I own is borrowed pride and work that was given to me to do." He meant, "My life is not mine." He meant, "I came south with meat. I stole from the dark, and I only own the memory of that theft, and you do not want that on your table." Glover took his hand and turned it palm up and lifted it. "Put that down," he said. Rai put his hand on the plank. Walken, startled, and then very nearly laughing, and then looking around to see who might mock, and seeing that no one would, fetched a ribbon of red and bound the boy's wrist lightly, and then cut it free and set the scrap next to the cord of Tormund, the knife of Willa, the hook of Manderley, the gate of Glover. Bran took last. He took bread and salt and said only, "Bran." He did not say king. He did not say Stark. He put down a glove. He did not mind that it made Walken blink. He did not mind that Sansa's mouth softened in a way that looked like sadness translated suddenly into amusement. He put down the glove because hands are dangerous and useful both, and because sometimes a man has to remind himself not to touch what his skin will not let him forget. Walken dried the charter with sand and blew on it, and did not notice that he was whistling under his breath like a boy on a roof. He lifted it. He placed it into the case. He looked up for the nod that would send it on its next path, and Bran gave it. And the charter left the hall held like a newborn in a careful cradle. That night the witness learned a new sound. The voice of 100 quiet men at once. They did not sing. They did not talk loudly. They sat on the ringed stones and on the ground between, and they said their names once each, and told the air what they had given, and what they had taken, and what they hoped the law would protect in them, and in their neighbors. And it may have been vanity, and it may have been holiness, and it was very likely both. The way all decent human things are. Winter's back broke. You do not see it unless you are looking for the exact moment when a river stops crawling like a tired dog and stands up and runs. But the men who carried the charter's words in their hands over snow and back again saw it. They felt their boots pull less and their breath go out and come in with a little less effort, and the smell of rot begin to show itself at the edges of snowbanks, honest and full of life's insult. The witness stones warmed the way cold things do in spring, not by gathering heat, but by letting go of it more slowly when touched. The Kraken never came in force. A few men made trouble, as men do, and went away chastened, as the world sometimes allows. The shore learned how to throw a rope, and when to put its end down, and go inside and let weather do what law cannot. Stories went south. They ran ahead of the charter and grew like hair on the truth, wild and more than it needed. They said the North had set up a circle of stones where men could do magic and make thieves honest by talking at them, while women poured water into bowls and kings' brothers wrote their names on smoke. They were not entirely wrong. Men are made honest by talk, more often than by swords. The bowls stayed full. The smoke learned to go up and not into men's lungs. A woman from Skagos came ashore at White Harbor with slabs of a meat she would not name and a bag of teeth she would not count. She wore a cloak of skins that had not been washed too much for fear that their stories would run. She came to the witness and stood outside the ring and did not step in until a raven, by accident or hunger, came down for a crumb near her foot, and the witness decided there had been an offering, and no one could gainsay that. She opened her mouth and let go of a sound that had more wind in it than language, and it turned into words as it went. She said there was a shoal thick with fish, and she would sell its location for iron that had not seen much blood. Manderley's boy stroked his beard that did not yet deserve stroking, and said they would pay in boats and bread, and not in iron. And the woman shrugged in a way that made it clear she had been offered worse by men and better by weather, and did not expect too much of either. Glover went to a wedding in a steading where the bride's hands told him more about what she needed from him than any free man's speech had told him in 6 months. He stood at the door and watched the woman lay her palm to each lintel and whisper something that had the shape of thanks and the taste of a warning. When he went inside, the free put down knives on the table where they could be seen, and the house men slid theirs under their belts, and no one died, and that was law's victory more than any decree. Sansa sat sometimes by the new-made ring and let girls come and learn how a door is kept in the mind as much as by a bar. You cannot keep a man out if your mind has already let him in to tell you a story about how he will love you afterward, she said. It does not matter whether that story is true or false. The door does not care. Teach your mind to keep a door. They nodded because she was beautiful and a little frightening, and because she had learned to tie most of her fury under her smile like a knife strapped at the ankle, unobtrusive, available, clean die. She and Bran spoke less and better. At night, after a long day of little laws, they let themselves be children enough to remember a mother's hand. Once he said to her, "Father would have done this differently." And she said, "No," and then, after a respectful silence for ghosts, "Yes," and they laughed, and it was not mockery. It was gratitude that the dead are forgiven their guesses. Rai learned to sleep without waking and listening for footsteps, and then he learned to wake and listen anyway, because sometimes footsteps mean safety and bread. He took a winter's service with the potboy as something more than shame, as a tool to make himself useful. At the end of the season, before any eye could name him lazy, he walked to the witness and unwrapped his burned hand and put the wrap in the bowl, and said, simply, "I will go where there is a hearth without enough hands." "No," Glover said, so ordinary that it sounded like kindness. "You'll stay. There's always a door. There's always a hinge. My house likes your hands." Rai cried again messily, in a way that made Tormund slap his back and say that he should have learned by now where the wet runs when a man behaves like a river. Glover gave the boy a piece of the old gate from Deepwood and said, "Put that on your wall," as if he had not put most of his own heart there already. Bran's nights changed. The tree took him into slower waters. There were fewer visions with knives in them. There were more of the kind where you watch men learn to be gentle without telling them to. He watched the witness long after it had become boring to everyone else. He learned to love its boredom. He learned to love the way a child would come sometimes, and fall asleep against a stone, and wake with a new word in their mouth for the shape of comfort. He learned how to forgive his sight for not giving him everything. He learned to be grateful for the things that came only when he was not looking, which is how contentment arrives, shy and efficient. In the mornings, he came to the ring without ceremony, and let men mistake his presences for accident. One dawn, a boy with hair like rough-cut straw stood where men who do not know whether they are welcome stand, and said bluntly, "My father's dead. He died because I pushed him. He was drunk and I wanted him not on my mother. I pushed him and his head found a step. I would like to owe what I owe." 100 answers presented themselves to the gathered, as answers do when there is blood on the ground. Most died before they were born because of the witness. It made answers be born in the right order. Bran let the boy's voice sit in the ring a while. He put his hand on a stone. The tree worked like a second set of lungs behind his ribs without dragging him by the neck into deep water. He watched the moment. The boy's hand. The push that was not meant to take a head to stone. The fall that was a choice that the body made with gravity and not with malice. The sick quiet that followed. The way the woman's mouth opened and no sound came for a time, because grief had taken the words and put them in its own pocket to examine later. The way a dog left the room because some dogs will not stay when souls go out. He came back and saw the boy as simply as he could. Then he said, "Hearth Mother, the hill asks that you choose whether to take a winter's service from your son, or to take your son's place at a hearth that is not yours, and be cared for the way your husband should have cared for you. The boy will do the opposite. If he serves, you will be honored. If you take service, he will be honored. That is the debt. Now." The woman who had found her tongue and found it unwilling to make anything that sounded like mercy when men who had never washed her pots watched, said flatly, "I will go and be cared for," and a murmur of approval ran around the ring and did not stop until it had run into Sansa's eyes and decided it had better be quiet. Boy said also flatly, "I will serve," and you could see that the shape of him had improved for saying it, which is why men make laws and live by them even when they hate them. It is not because the laws are holy, but because men see themselves become more when they obey without flinching. That evening, Sansa took Bran's hand with a frankness that would have once made him proud, and now simply made him warm, and she said, considering the day, and the witness, and the kraken that had not come, and the boy with straw hair, "It will not always be this clean. You know that." I know," Bran said. "There will be a day when a man stands in the witness with blood in his mouth and lies like prayer. There will be a day when we set a price, and it is wrong, and we will pay for our mistake with a child's winter. There will be a day when men with crowns come north and ask us to explain ourselves as if law required their blessing." "And?" she prompted. "And we will bring them to the witness," he said. "We will give them bread and salt, and ask them to put some piece of themselves down, and they will fail to find one because kings do not carry such things openly. And we will be sorry for them because we are not unkind. Then we will tell them to go home. Then we will tell them to go home." She smiled, pride, and a sorrow she did not indulge. "I am glad you are my brother." He nodded, not because he was wise enough to accept such a gift cleanly, but because he was tired, and that is when a man's gratitude is most honest. News did come from the south eventually, on good paper in a tidy hand that had not learned to write in gloves. It said a great deal about tax and a good deal about duty, and not very much about hunger and winter. The small council wanted to know what this thing was that had been made in the north, and whether it would turn south and bite. Bran read it and felt nothing it asked him to feel. He sent back 4 words. "The hill is older." It was not an answer. It was a statement of present fact, which in some ways is the only kind of answer he believed in. The charter left the board one last time. It slept a week in Sansa's solar on a chest older than the young wolf. It rode in a sledge to White Harbor, where Marlin had a man with fine hands and the patience of a river, set it in a copy that would live in a shell of wood under salt, because Manderleys trust the sea more than fire. It went to Deepwood and was read to men who had learned to be suspicious of poetry and found themselves compelled by bread. It crossed the snow to little steadings where a woman put her hand to the ink and made a mark like a roof with smoke from it, as if to say, "This is what I want." It came back to the Godswood, and Bran set it under the tree and let it breathe the old terpenes that live in bark. He watched the words as if he had sprouted them and was surprised at their shape. He let himself feel pride, and then pushed pride down into the earth and let it be food for roots. Spring made its little noises. Water in a gutter where ice had lived. A bird with too much opinion in a hedge. A child laughing because the ground under his feet had turned from wall to carpet overnight, and he could fall and not hurt. The witness watched a man and a woman from houses that had spent a generation not speaking stand in the ring and name their baby stone setter. It watched Tormund teach Crowkiller's boy how to set a trap for a hare in the new grass that would not break the hare's leg if the boy wanted to let it go afterward. It watched Rai sit with the potboy and a fishwife and tell them a story about a time when he stole meat and learned to give it back in wood in his hands, and the way a man's sleep sweetens when his shame has been put to useful work. It watched Sansa stand alone in the circle at dusk and say nothing at all until the sky itself said, "You are sufficient," on a night when the moon went up pale and fat, and the wind laid down as if it had done all it could for now, and would begin again tomorrow. Bran wheeled out to the witness, and found someone had brought 3 fresh stones. They sat just outside the ring, patient, hopeful, like children at the edge of a game who have not yet been invited to play, but know that if they wait politely, they will be. He set his hand on the closest and felt the grain of the ground under it. He felt the old thinking approve, as if to say, yes. New is only old that hasn't learned its name yet. Welcome it, and it will teach you. He did not call for men to help. He set his shoulders and his mind into the task as if it were a hinge that had to be hung true. He counted the breaths it took to do nothing, and then the breaths it took to look, and then the breaths it took to nod, and then he said, very softly, "Tomorrow. Because law is patient, and you should not force it to hurry when there is light enough for the work tomorrow." He slept in the godswood, and dreamed the kind of dream that has no knife in it, and now and then, a piece of bread. By morning, men had come with levers and smiles. Women had come with wedges and their own opinions, which they used more skillfully than either levers or wedges. Children had come with questions that made the stones lighter. They set the 3 into the ring where there had been a gap no one had named until now. And when it was done, Tormund spat in the bowl, because he had seen Sansa do it once and decided it was a good habit. And Sansa spat in the bowl because she had decided long ago that being queenly meant remembering to do ordinary things honestly in public. And Bran put his gloved hand on the newest stone and said, "Wish the managed." The charter lay on Wolken's board, and if a man put his ear to it, he would hear nothing but the tiny rasp of winter turning itself into something else. That was enough. Men went home. They would be back. They would bring new troubles and new lies and new hopes that were too shiny or not shiny enough to be safe. They would stand in the ring and learn to speak to stones and to each other. They would use the charter as a ladle and a lever and a bandage and a mirror. They would forget parts of it and misremember others, and the forgetting would be as human as the remembering and as important. And through all this, the hill would stand, older than any of them. Your, my, and their names falling off it like spring water, and the ground drinking, and the hearths would call and be answered, and the path between would be walked, until even the snow learned to get out of the way of feet that had learned their business. On a day when the air smelled only of thaw, and not at all of smoke, Bran rolled up to the heart tree again, and laid his hand against its bark, and felt an old slow approval. He felt his father's shadow pass over him with a weight that was not accusation but attendance. He felt the boys they had been run round the yard and trip and fall, and get up and fling their arms around each other, because there was meat and bread, and a bed to sleep in, and words on a board that would make it possible, just barely, for more boys to run without having to choose between being wolves and being meat. He felt the witness ring not as stones, but as a mouth into which the North could speak its own name and not be ashamed of the sound. Keep, he told the tree again, and himself, and the world, patient and old, kept.